This is a Rubbing Minds special for International Women's Month, powered by Lipton.
Welcome back. You're watching Rubbing Minds. When we look at our country, and we have so many different challenges, but when it comes to gender equality, gender parity, how can it be addressed in a practical way where we're going to ensure that both men and women are on par?
Well, we need to start by looking at the legislative policy frameworks that need to be in place. We do have some legislations and policies. We need a whole lot more. But what we do have is we have the Constitution, for whatever that is worth, and there are supposed to be constitutional amendments or constitutional reforms happening now. And the issue of gender equality and women's empowerment is supposed to be a part of that. And the feedback we are getting is that it seems to be something that is still elusive. People are still trying to push that off the table. We have the National Gender Policy, which was first put in place in 2005 and revised in 2015. Every state in the country is supposed to take the National Gender Policy to use as a roadmap for how to address women's empowerment in their different states. The first state in Nigeria to domesticate the National Gender Policy was Ekiti State in 2011. And since then, I believe just 2 other states have done so. I believe Jigawa is one, I've forgotten the other, but we don't have more than 3 states in the Federation who have domesticated the National Gender Policy. Then we have the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Law. We've had a bit more luck with that, partly as a result of the advocacy that's been done through the Nigeria Governors Forum. So as we speak, there are at least 20 states out of 36 who have domesticated the VAP Act, and we are convinced that before the end of 2021, there will be more. Then we have the Child Rights Act, which has been domesticated by, I think, all states in southern Nigeria, some states in northern Nigeria, but not all, so there's still a lot of work that's being done on that. We need to intensify efforts on these policy frameworks and legal and policy frameworks, because that is what can ensure that we have the roadmaps in place, the resources in place, and the political will to follow through on all these issues. And then another important thing with regards to ensuring that we address women's rights in this way is there has to be a commitment, especially on behalf of the federal and state governments, to strengthening the gender machineries that we have at the national level and at state level. From my experience, it's not just a Nigerian issue. Working with gender machineries across the African continent, they're usually the least resourced in terms of financial resources, human resources, material resources.
When you say gender machineries, can you break that down?
The ministries of Women Affairs and Social Development, that's what we mean by gender machineries. They are usually the least resourced in terms of access to financial resources. The budget of many ministries of women's affairs is one budget line in the Ministry of Health or Ministry of Works, the entire budget for many ministries of women's affairs. So we need to pay attention to how we strengthen the Federal Ministry of Women's Affairs in terms of its budget, in terms of their personnel, in terms of the technical skills and resources they're supposed to have, and also at state level as well. If we do not do that, it means that every political season, if there are people like us who are passionate about these issues, once we leave the scene, if those institutions have not been strengthened, then everything is going to fall flat, because they will see these things as pet projects, as personal projects of first lady this or first lady that. But if we strengthen these institutions, then it means that on an ongoing basis, there is a commitment to ensuring that there will be implementation in the state, and those who need to have access to certain resources will have the access.
Yeah. So how do we transition from, as a young woman, and I say this because even I think of, my peers and my colleagues and the mindset of what a woman's role is in society. So when you're thinking about, you've gone to school, yes, I made sure my daughter went to school, I made sure she got her education, but there's still a heavy emphasis placed on the fact that women must become wives, they must become mothers, and empowerment is not as important. do you believe that that concept is a tradition that is holding us back and, can be evolved? Or is it something that it doesn't really matter? It needs to be moved away.
Well, we live in deeply patriarchal societies.
I didn't want to use the word, but I figured you'd bring it up.
Yes, we live in these deeply patriarchal societies which use culture, tradition, and religion to determine women's roles and determine the kind of space or the kind of voice that they can have. And it's throughout their life cycle. I usually make this joke because I ran a workshop once a couple of years ago, and I asked a group of women, can you tell me something from your culture which gives you an idea that you are not the same, that you don't have the same rights as men have? And then someone said, well, in my culture, on the 8th day, when the baby is born, if the baby is a boy, on the 8th day, they kill a goat. If it's a girl, on the 8th day, they kill a chicken. So that tells you a lot. The difference between the value of a goat and the value of a chicken. And that's how we are socialized into believing that as women, we are less than. We don't have the same right to a voice. We don't have the same right to space. And even when we go to school with boys, even when we go to work with men, even when we aspire for positions with men, there's always something that tells us that we are just not enough. Whatever position we are in, we need to ensure that we do what we can to empower the women around us, to ensure that they have a voice. And let people know that, yes, women can do a lot of things. They can hold down careers. They can hold down families. They can do, the sky is the limit. If we do not place limits on what men can accomplish, why do we want to do the same for women? I was raised by a father who consistently told me that there's nothing that I cannot do. And I wish all men were like my father and they could raise their daughters with confidence and self-esteem.
If you go online, you will see the backlash against the advancement of women's rights and our ability to have agency in society.
Yeah, but it's not limited to just the African society or to Nigeria. That backlash is global. I agree that ours is worse, but it all stems from our upbringing and our culture. And people do believe it, but it's very difficult to overcome it. I do not think we are going to be able to see a total switch in our lifetimes. It's a very long and in-depth process, and it's going to take a long time. And we also need, what I feel is that at the brunt of all this, I'm a medical person, but I always say the first goal or the first sector of development that we must address to improve the lots of women and girls is education. When a girl is educated up to primary school level, the maternal mortality of the country drastically reduces by up to 40%. And as you go higher, it gets more and more and more, the reduction in rates. So that education has a direct relationship with the mindset of that people that think of things like patriarchal.
That's true.
Society.
An educated person will be able to understand, these concepts that we're speaking. Hopefully the education is actually sound as well. Thank you very much, ma'am. We're going to go on a quick break. We'll be right back after this.
Don't just stand there teasing me. Now it's time to show and prove.
This is a Rubbing Minds special for International Women's Month, powered by Lipton.
Welcome back to Rubbing Minds. Now, I want us to go straight right into this next topic of conversation because we've talked about, women's rights. We've talked about the girl child and our access to education. And I want us to talk about women empowerment. Now, we see a lot of different initiatives that are happening. So there's skills acquisition, whether it's learning how to do a trade or learning how to make some sort of product to sell. And we realized that last year, COVID put women way far behind in terms of increasing the gap in poverty between men and women. How effective do you think, the skills acquisition programs are based on your experiences? And of course, we're all aware of the stark reality of poverty in Nigeria.
Well, I know that people have a lot to say about empowerment programs, especially in our communities where you give out grinding machines and sewing machines and you run skills acquisition programs and like tie and dye, soap making and so on. My take on that is it's important to address women's practical needs in those terms. So giving them those tools and items for them to be able to go out and make a living for themselves is important. But for me, what is even more important is addressing the systemic issues that keep women in poverty, that keep them marginalized, and that keep this, what I refer to as a cycle of generational poverty going. And so it's okay to give a woman a sewing machine, but of what benefit is that sewing machine if, for example, she's going to go home every night to be beaten? So we need to address more strategic issues in relation to, women's empowerment, such as, access to education, as my sister has just said, such as ensuring, as we said earlier, that we have laws in place to protect women from violence, and that we have institutions that can address those issues as well, such as sexual assault referral centers, as well as shelters should women in distress need them. Women also need access to land. If women are farmers, for example, and they're farming land that they'll never own because the culture in that community does not allow women to own land, how can you empower such a woman on a sustainable basis? So women need access to those kinds of resources, land, to capital, for them to be able to start businesses.
Yeah, I mean, really well said, and I think there's so many different, thoughts on this, in the fact that yes, at this very moment, this person needs some sort of financial, empowerment. What are your thoughts on it, Dr. Babadu?
Well, to be honest, I used to be one of those that used to scoof at those sewing machines and things. But now that I am in a position where I have to do something, I'm not just an onlooker, I am a doer and one of those that are acting to change the lives of women and even young men. They are necessary. What are we going to give the women in the rural areas? Computers? Laptops? It's not going to work. You have to give them implements that they can use. And if we don't, or we can just not give them at all and say we need to educate them and we need to teach them and we wait for all our laws and everything to be put in place and all the bandits to be stopped and everything, how do they feed? How do they sustain themselves? How do they send their children to school? It's a cycle. For some, it might not be as good as it will be, but we hope that it will be better for their daughters. So if we give her that sewing machine and the grinding machine, she can use it to send her daughter to school. She can chip into the family income, the whole pool in the family, while we keep on sorting out all the other things. So they're very necessary, and most of all, they're welcome. And it makes the women happy, it makes them productive, it makes them able to do something. Yes, there's skill acquisition classes as well, but you have to give a startup. What we do differently, it's getting better. Nowadays, we do some business training skills as well in the local languages, in the local context, the way they will understand it, so that they can access small loans or grants and do a lot of information dissemination around those initiatives that come up, like the Survival Fund. A lot of women benefited from it in my state, and they're not educated women, but this is through the power of media and using the boys around and the other people around to go around and actually help them fill those forms, and they got their alerts. It worked. So these are all the things that it's not a bad thing, but we can organize it better. We can work on all the other background factors that will make life better for not just the women but the men as well.
Years ago, when these issues were a big debate in Women and Development, and a lot of Western feminists were trying to create these dichotomies between women's practical needs and strategic needs, and de-emphasizing the importance of having direct empowerment tools that we are talking about, with the focus being more on systemic issues. Right. It took me coming back to the continent and working across different countries in Africa, and then being in the position I'm in now, to realize how important these practical things are. Last year, one of our colleagues gave out empowerment materials to women in her state, and it included sachets of pure water for them to start a pure water business. You should have seen the backlash and the derision online. It was nauseating. And I was thinking, these people who are sitting in their comfortable offices in Abuja, in Lagos, or Port Harcourt, typing all this, do they understand what it's like to be a woman living in poverty in a remote part of the country? These are the things we are faced with on a daily basis. So I don't think we should ever discourage people from doing those things. And actually, I think we are appealing to Nigerians. You can support people in your community from wherever you are. You don't have to be a first lady. You don't have to be a top government official, but with whatever little you have, find out what it is women in your community need. Is it grinding machines? Is it sewing machines? Is it, vocational skills training, and sponsor something? But as I said earlier, we also need to keep working, trying to encourage our husbands to address the systemic issues, because we don't want to keep doing these stopgap measures forever. But people should stop deriding these interventions. They're absolutely critical, and we need to be aware of how much women in particular need them in our communities.
We all know, we're all aware that being a governor's wife, it's not a political position, but when you think of the role and you think of the kind of legacy you want to leave behind, what does that look like to you?
Well, I want to be remembered, first of all, as being a supportive spouse, under whose administration there was advancement for the women, for the men, and everybody in the states. We do have a lot of firsts in Kebbi State. For instance, we have 23 elected female local government councillors, which is very unusual across the country. So I think we would like to be remembered for doing more of those things and for creating an enabling environment, a peaceful one. Kebbi is one of the, in fact, it's on record as the safest state in Nigeria. So a state where women were able to thrive better and do much better.
Okay, thank you.
And of course, the health indices.
And then of course, I mean,
health
the work that you've done with mental health is amazing. Irelu, what about you?
Well, yes, I believe I'd like my legacy to be that of a spouse who supported her husband to accomplish all the goals he set and to fulfill all the promises that he made to the people of the state. I would like to be remembered for, people keep saying that to me all the time, so I own it. I'd like to be remembered for my passion for women and the love I have for everyone regardless of their circumstances, and the fact that Ekiti State today has about the most comprehensive laws and policies in the country to promote gender equality and women's empowerment. These issues will not be resolved in one day or in one administrative term, but they are there with institutions that we have created in the state, such as having a sexual assault referral center, a 208-bed transit home for women and girls, a place, the Fumiola Inca Diagnostic Center, where women can go to for diagnostics around all forms of cancer, and a whole range of resources like that, both at state level and local government level. So I'd like to be remembered as someone who took her position seriously, did not take it for granted, and who was invested in ensuring that other women also come on board so that we can claim these successes together.
Brilliant. Wow, thank you so much. I have to say it was such an honor to be able to sit down and have this conversation with you. Before we go, the theme is Choose to Challenge, so I want to find out, individually, as women, I know you're always representing your state, but as individuals, what would you say you're choosing to challenge?
All forms of gender inequities, health, education, political decision-making process. I choose to challenge all forms of gender inequities.
I choose to challenge all forms of injustice. All forms of injustice that render women voiceless, that render women without choices, and that render women second-class citizens throughout their life cycles. I challenge that.
So do you have a message to Nigerian women? Is there anything, you can look directly to the cameras if you have a message that you'd like to pass across directly?
Well, my message is simple, is never forget who you are and work hard at who you want to become, and you will definitely get there.
My message is, let us be our sister's keeper. Let us bring out our wrappers for one another, our wrappers of compassion, solidarity, empathy, and unity. If we stand together, then we'll be able to accomplish great things together, regardless of the obstacles.
This has been a Rubbing Minds special all month, which is featuring amazing Amazon women who are doing exciting and amazing things in their fields. My name is Bolanle Olukoni, and this special edition is powered by Lipton. We're going on a quick break. When we come back, Rubbing Minds continues.
Wanna get with you. Don't just stand there teasing me. Now it's time to show and prove.
This is a Rubbing Minds special for International Women's Month, powered by Lipton.